Please follow me. The little black girl told the biker as metal doors slammed inside the intake corridor. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. It was a quiet, almost eerie night at the hospital. The dim light flickered as the cold air seeped through the sterile hallways. Suddenly, the peace was shattered by the frantic sound of heavy footsteps echoing through the intake corridor. A little girl, no older than 8 or 9, appeared, running as fast as her tiny legs would carry her. Her tear-streaked face was filled with desperation as she reached the entrance of the biker club. Her voice was shaky, yet filled with urgency as she gasped, "Please follow me." She was barely able to catch her breath. Behind her, metal doors slammed shut with a deafening crash, signaling something far more sinister unfolding inside the walls of the hospital. The biker, whose name was Jack, was caught off guard by the intensity of the situation. He had been coming in to check on a friend who had been admitted, but this girl's presence turned everything upside down. As she stood in front of him, her hands gripping the leather of his vest, Jack could see the fear in her eyes. Fear that wasn't just about her own safety. She had run all the way here, alone, in search of someone to protect her from the danger she had left behind. Jack kneeled down to her level, looking her in the eyes, trying to keep his voice calm. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Who's after you?" The little girl, her breath ragged, looked around, almost as if she feared being followed. She whispered, "They took my brother." Her words hung in the air, and Jack could see the panic rising in her chest. His instincts kicked in immediately. This wasn't just a simple case of runaway kids. Something far more dangerous was at play. "Who took him, honey?" Jack asked, his tone soft but urgent. "They're bad men. They have a silver car with a skull sticker on the back. They took him." He's scared, and I'm scared too. The realization hit Jack hard. This was no random kidnapping. These were people who knew exactly what they were doing. "Where did they take him?" "We need to go now," Jack said, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "I don't know," she replied, her voice cracking. "But they're inside, and they're gonna hurt him." Jack stood up, looking to his crew for help. The urgency in the girl's voice spurred him into action. "Get the crew together," he ordered. "We need to move fast. This girl's brother's life is at stake." The sound of the metal doors slamming was a warning, but the urgency in the girl's voice was the real call to action. Jack wasn't sure what he would find inside, but one thing was for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone harm this little girl or her brother. The biker crew, a group of men and women with a past that could easily turn violent, instantly shifted gears. They weren't just a group of rebels. They were a family, and family came first. With the girl's hands still gripping Jack's vest, they moved as one toward the hospital's intake doors. What was waiting for them inside could be far worse than they ever expected, but they were ready to face it together. This wasn't just about saving a child. It was about keeping a promise Jack had made years ago. A promise to protect the ones who couldn't protect themselves. The moment the heavy metal doors slammed behind them, Jack could feel the tension in the air. His crew was on edge, every one of them ready for anything, but the fear in the girl's eyes, the urgency in her voice, had set them all on high alert. As they walked swiftly down the narrow hospital corridors, Jack could hear the sound of their footsteps echoing through the sterile halls, each step bringing them closer to an unknown danger. The little girl, her small hands still gripping his leather vest, was now walking faster, her eyes darting around, paranoid and terrified. Jack kept pace with her, his own instincts telling him that time was running out. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The girl, still looking over her shoulder, whispered, "The storage room. They put him there." Jack nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know who these men were, but he could feel the dark energy surrounding them. They were trouble, and trouble was something Jack knew all too well. His crew, the Iron Riders, had faced worse. They were tough, not afraid of a fight. But this was different. They weren't here for a simple brawl. They were here to protect an innocent life. "Hold on, kid," Jack said, slowing down a bit to let the others catch up. "We're not letting anything happen to your brother." The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and fear. She didn't speak, but the way she clung to him spoke volumes. They reached a corner, and Jack stopped, raising his hand to signal the others to hold their ground. He needed to make sure they didn't rush into something they weren't prepared for. The last thing they needed was to give these guys any reason to start a fight. "Stay low, stay quiet," Jack whispered. "We go in, get the boy, and get out. No heroics. No unnecessary risk." His crew nodded in agreement, each one of them now fully in sync. They had been through too much together to let a kid down now. The girl pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. "That's it," she said softly. Jack took a deep breath, nodded to his team, and motioned for them to move. They approached the door with quiet precision, their leather boots barely making a sound. Jack reached for the handle, pausing for a moment before turning it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room filled with old medical supplies and boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. The air was thick with the scent of dust and stale air. But what caught Jack's attention wasn't the room, it was the boy. He was sitting on the floor, his legs drawn up to his chest, his face pale and tear-streaked. The moment he saw the girl, his eyes lit up, but they were filled with terror. "Maya," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I was so scared." The girl ran to him immediately, dropping to her knees beside him. "It's okay, Jamal. They're here. They're going to take us home." Jack stepped forward, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. His crew had spread out around the room, forming a protective perimeter. The door was open now, and there was no telling who might come through it next. "Are you all right?" Jack asked the boy, his voice softer now. "We're going to get you out of here." Jamal looked up at Jack, still trembling, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "We're just some people who care," Jack replied with a reassuring smile, though inside, his gut was twisting. He couldn't explain it all to the boy, not yet. "Where's the man who took you?" He was here," Jamal stammered, "but he left." Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. The man they were dealing with wasn't just a random criminal. This was something more sinister. He could feel it in his bones. "We're leaving now," Jack said firmly, looking at his crew. "Move out now." The sound of their boots echoing down the hall was the only noise that filled the silence. They had to leave, and they had to leave quickly. There was still no sign of the man, but Jack wasn't going to risk waiting around. The last thing he needed was to be caught off guard. As they moved down the hallway, Jack couldn't help but glance back at the girl and her brother. They were both safe for now, but Jack knew that the danger wasn't over. They had escaped once, but there was no telling what would happen next. The man who had taken them would come back, and when he did, Jack and his crew would be ready. "You're safe now," Jack said, glancing back at the girl and her brother, his voice filled with determination. "We're getting you out of here." The group moved quickly, the urgency of the situation fueling their every step. Jack's crew was well coordinated, instinctively falling into position as they navigated the dimly lit corridors of the hospital. The girl, Maya, was now holding her brother's hand tightly, looking up at Jack with a mixture of gratitude and anxiety. Her brother, Jamal, was still visibly shaken, but his trust in Jack was growing. He kept looking around, his wide eyes darting from one biker to the next, unsure of what to make of the group of strangers who had come to their rescue. Jack glanced back at them, his heart heavy with the weight of the promise he had made to Tyrone years ago. No matter what it took, he was going to keep this promise. They reached the exit, and Jack could hear the rumble of their motorcycles outside, the engines purring like a lion waiting to pounce. The group had already prepared to move, but Jack knew that getting out of the hospital was just the beginning. The real danger still awaited them. As they stepped outside, the cool night air hit them like a blast. The convoy was ready, the sound of their engines echoing through the parking lot. The Iron Riders were a force to be reckoned with, but Jack's mind was already racing ahead, thinking of the next steps. "We need to get them somewhere safe," Jack muttered, his eyes scanning the area. His crew was already positioning themselves, ready to guard every exit and make sure nothing went wrong. Maya clutched her brother's hand tighter as they approached the bikes, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "Are we going home?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Not yet," Jack replied, crouching down to her level. "But we will soon. We just need to get you two somewhere safe first." Maya nodded, but there was fear in her eyes. She didn't fully understand what was going on, but she trusted Jack. For now, that was enough. The Iron Riders mounted their bikes, and Jack's heart raced as he kicked his engine to life. The roar of the engines filled the air as the convoy set off into the night. They moved in perfect formation, the bikes weaving through the streets, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The cool air ruffled Jack's hair as they sped down the highway, the sense of urgency growing with every passing mile. Jack's mind was focused on one thing: keeping Maya and Jamal safe. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They had barely reached the outskirts of town when the first sign of trouble appeared. A car, sleek and black, was tailing them from a distance. It was hard to make out the details, but Jack's gut told him that it wasn't just any random driver. The car was moving in sync with them, staying just far enough behind to avoid detection, but close enough to keep an eye on. Their every move. Jack's hand tightened around the throttle as he glanced over his shoulder. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We've got company," Jack muttered into his radio. "Stay alert." The convoy's pace increased, the sound of the engines growing louder as they picked up speed. They needed to shake the car to make sure they weren't being followed. Jack could see his crew's formation adjust in the rearview mirror as they prepared for what was coming. The black car sped up, closing the gap between them. It wasn't long before the vehicle was right on their tail, just a few feet away from the last biker in line. Jack's eyes narrowed. It was time to confront whoever was behind the wheel. "Hold steady," Jack said through his comms. "We're not running." The convoy veered off the main highway, cutting through a series of back roads. Jack's eyes scanned the road ahead, looking for a spot to turn the tables. He had no intention of letting anyone harm Maya and Jamal. They had made it this far, and there was no turning back now. Suddenly, Jack swerved his bike to the left, taking the convoy down a narrow, gravel path that cut through the woods. The tires kicked up dust as they maneuvered through the sharp turns. The black car followed, but the driver was clearly not used to the rough terrain. Jack grinned as he glanced behind him, watching the car struggle to keep up. The convoy moved faster, taking the path with ease. The trees blurred past them, the air thick with the scent of pine and dirt. Jack's heart raced as he pushed his bike harder, his eyes scanning the path ahead for any obstacles. But just as he thought they had lost the car, the sound of screeching tires echoed in the distance. The car had caught up again. Jack cursed under his breath. He had underestimated them. The car was relentless. "We need a plan B," Jack said into the comms, his voice tense. He was ready to make his move, but he needed to act fast. The convoy kept moving, weaving through the woods as Jack's mind raced. He knew the area well, and he had a plan to lose the car for good. The only problem was, he wasn't sure if it would work. The car was getting too close. Suddenly, Jack took a sharp right turn, leading the convoy toward a steep incline. The path was narrow and treacherous, but it was their best shot. The convoy followed closely, their bikes roaring as they powered up the incline. The black car hesitated, unsure if it could make the climb. Jack could see the headlights flicker in his rearview mirror as the car slowed down, trying to figure out what to do. Jack pushed his bike harder, feeling the adrenaline surge through him as they reached the top of the incline. They had made it. For now, they were safe. But Jack knew this was just the beginning. Whoever was behind the wheel of that car wasn't going to give up easily, and Jack was ready to face whatever came next. The convoy slowed as Jack took another sharp turn, the bikes skimming over rough terrain as the forest around them seemed to close in. The sound of the engines was now a distant hum, the trees thick and heavy, blocking out most of the light. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened as his mind raced. They had shaken the black car off for now, but he knew they weren't out of danger yet. "We've got a good lead, but stay sharp," Jack radioed to the crew, his voice calm but urgent. "We don't know who's behind that wheel, but I'm betting they're not going to let up. We've got to get these kids out of here, and we need to keep moving." The crew acknowledged, their voices steady over the comms, each biker focusing on the path ahead. Maya and Jamal, now sitting on the back of a bike, were clinging to each other. Maya had finally stopped crying, but there was a haunted look in her eyes. Jack could feel the weight of their trust in him, and it was a weight he didn't take lightly. As they rode on, the road ahead seemed endless, winding through the thick woods and rolling hills. The tension was palpable, but Jack kept his focus. He had promised to get these kids to safety, and that's exactly what he was going to do. The convoy had made it through a dozen twists and turns, and the trees were thinning, revealing a small clearing up ahead. Jack's heart skipped a beat. It was the perfect place to set up a defensive position, but it was also an open space, vulnerable. "Hold up," Jack said, his voice low but firm. "We're stopping here. We'll make camp for the night." The convoy pulled into the clearing, the engines cutting off one by one as the riders dismounted. Jack surveyed the area, his instincts telling him this was as safe as it was going to get for now. "Everyone, stay alert. We'll set up watch," Jack instructed, motioning to his crew. "We can't afford to let our guard down, especially with those people chasing us." He turned to Maya and Jamal, who were sitting on the ground, trying to catch their breath. Maya looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Will we be safe here?" Jack knelt down beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "For tonight, yes. We'll make sure nothing happens to you or your brother. You're safe here." Maya's eyes were filled with gratitude, but there was still a flicker of fear deep within. Jack knew it would take time for her to feel safe again, but for now, they were together, and that was what mattered. As the night fell, the bikers set up a perimeter, the faint glow of campfires flickering in the distance. Jack sat near the fire, his mind racing as he watched the shadows dance across the ground. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, but the more he tried to push the thought away, the stronger it became. He turned to Phantom, one of his most trusted riders. "Stay on high alert. I don't like this. We're being hunted, and we need to know why." Phantom nodded, his eyes sharp, scanning the surroundings. "We'll keep an eye out. No one's getting past us." Jack appreciated Phantom's calm demeanor, but the nagging feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. He knew they weren't just dealing with some random thugs. The people chasing them were organized, and they had a purpose. They weren't going to stop until they had what they wanted. Jack's thoughts were interrupted when he heard a sound in the distance. A faint noise, like a twig snapping. His head snapped up, and he motioned for the crew to stay quiet. The sound came again, this time louder. Someone was out there. Jack signaled to Storm, the biggest guy in the crew. "Go check it out," he whispered. Storm nodded and moved silently into the woods, his massive frame blending into the darkness. The rest of the crew followed suit, their eyes trained on the perimeter, waiting for any sign of danger. Jack stayed by the fire, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, ready for anything. The minutes stretched on, and every second felt like an eternity. Just as Jack was about to call for Storm to return, the big man emerged from the shadows, his face grim. "They're here," Storm said, his voice low. "And they're close." Jack's heart dropped. He had hoped to get some rest, but it looked like their enemies were already closing in. "How many?" Jack asked, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "At least 4, Storm replied, his eyes scanning the trees. "And they're armed." Jack stood up, his mind racing. They couldn't fight this battle here, not with Maya and Jamal so close. "All right," Jack said, his voice cold and calculated. "We move out now." The crew quickly packed up, the bikes roaring to life once again as they prepared to leave the clearing. Jack didn't know where they were going yet, but he knew they had to get away from the woods. The longer they stayed in one place, the higher the risk of getting caught. They couldn't afford that. "Stay sharp," Jack ordered, his voice echoing over the comms. "No one's slowing down. We're moving fast, and we're staying together." As the convoy raced through the night, Jack's mind was focused on one thing: keeping Maya and Jamal safe. The danger wasn't over yet, but Jack was determined to face whatever came next. He had promised to protect them, and he wasn't going to break that promise. Not now, not ever. The convoy sped through the night, the roar of the engines cutting through the otherwise still air. Jack's mind was razor-sharp as he focused on the road ahead, but a nagging feeling gnawed at him. The chase wasn't over. He could feel it in his gut. The Iron Riders were riding as one, moving in perfect synchronization, but every minute that passed felt like an eternity. They had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, because they weren't out of the woods yet. Maya and Jamal were both silent behind him, their small bodies pressed against him on the bike, their fear palpable. Jack kept his focus on the road ahead, but his thoughts were with them. These kids had already been through so much, and he wasn't about to let them down now. The black car had been tailing them for miles, but it was still too far back to make a move. Jack kept pushing the bikes, keeping the convoy tight. They couldn't risk falling behind. The terrain started to change as they neared the outskirts of the town. The streets were narrower now, and the shadows seemed to grow darker. The bikes rumbled through the quiet, deserted streets, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Jack knew this area well. He'd ridden these streets countless times, but tonight it felt different. Something was wrong. "They're getting closer," Jack muttered into his radio. "Stay tight, everyone. Don't let up." The rest of the crew acknowledged, their voices steady. But Jack could hear the tension in their words. They all knew that they were being hunted, and the people chasing them wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened as he glanced back in the rearview mirror. The black car was gaining on them. It was still a few hundred feet away, but it was clear that the driver wasn't going to let them slip away that easily. Jack's instincts flared, and he made a sharp turn down a side street, hoping to lose the car in the maze of narrow alleys. The convoy followed, the sound of their engines echoing off the walls of the buildings. But the black car followed, its headlights flashing in the rearview mirror. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. They needed a plan. "We're not losing them," Jack said through the radio. "We need to get off the main roads." "Agreed," Phantom replied, his voice steady. "There's an old freight yard up ahead. We can use it to split them up." "Good idea," Jack said, his mind already working out the details. "Let's move." The convoy veered left, cutting through a gap in the buildings and onto an old, cracked road that led to the freight yard. The sound of the black car's engine roared in the distance, but Jack wasn't worried. They had the advantage now. The yard was a maze of rusted metal containers, abandoned equipment, and cracked concrete, but it would work to their advantage. They could lose the car in there, and they could make a stand if needed. "Stay close," Jack ordered. "We're making a stand here." The convoy spread out, weaving through the maze of containers, their headlights casting long shadows across the yard. The air was thick with the scent of old oil and rust, but Jack kept his focus. He could hear the black car's engine getting closer, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a predator closing in on its prey. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened as they neared the back corner of the yard. He could hear the sound of the car's tires screeching on the gravel as it tried to make the turn. The convoy was ready. Jack glanced back at the crew, signaling them to spread out. They were about to make their move. Just as the car entered the yard, Jack made a sharp turn, leading the convoy into a narrow alley between two shipping containers. The black car followed, but it wasn't able to navigate the sharp turn as easily as the bikes. The convoy split into two, and Jack could hear the sound of the car's engine revving behind them, but it was too late. The black car had been separated from the pack. Jack grinned to himself, but he wasn't about to get complacent. "All right, let's move," Jack said. "We've got them right where we want them." The convoy sped through the maze of containers, their engines roaring as they moved with precision. They had the advantage now, and they weren't going to let it slip away. But just as Jack thought they had the upper hand, a loud screech rang out from behind them. The black car had somehow found a way to catch up. Jack cursed under his breath. This wasn't over yet. The black car was faster than he had anticipated, and now it was gaining ground again. Jack didn't have time to think. He veered his bike to the left, hoping to force the car into a dead end. The convoy followed, the sound of their engines echoing in the yard. The black car was right behind them, but it was starting to struggle. It was too big to navigate the tight turns of the yard, and Jack could see the driver getting frustrated. He wasn't going to let them escape without a fight. "Push harder," Jack ordered, his voice steady. "We're almost there." The convoy accelerated, the bikes weaving through the yard with ease. The black car was still following, but it was losing ground now. Jack could see the entrance to the yard up ahead, the streetlights flickering in the distance. They were almost free. Just a little more. The convoy pushed forward, the bikes roaring as they broke free of the freight yard. Jack glanced back at the crew, a grin spreading across his face. They had made it. The black car had been left behind. For now, they were safe. But Jack knew that this wasn't the end. Whoever was behind that wall wasn't going to give up so easily. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The convoy had made it out of the freight yard, but Jack's sense of relief was short-lived. He could feel the weight of the chase still pressing on his shoulders, like a storm waiting to break. The Iron Riders were pushing forward through the narrow, desolate streets, the headlights from their bikes cutting through the dark, empty roads. Jack's eyes flickered to the rearview mirror, and his stomach twisted. The black car was nowhere in sight. For now, they were safe. But Jack knew the peace wouldn't last long. Whoever was behind the wheel of that car wasn't about to give up. The bikes roared through the streets, their engines the only sound in the quiet night. The wind whipped past Jack's face as he pushed the bike faster, urging his crew to keep up the pace. The convoy wasn't just trying to outrun their pursuers anymore. They were trying to outsmart them. Jack's focus was unbroken, his mind constantly on the move. Maya and Jamal were still riding with him, their small bodies pressed against him for comfort, but Jack couldn't help but notice how tense they were. Maya had stopped asking questions, but Jack could see the worry in her eyes. She was scared, and rightfully so. Jack wasn't sure what would happen if they were caught, but he wasn't willing to find out. He wasn't going to let them down. "Keep moving," Jack said, his voice low but determined, speaking into the radio as he led the group. "We need to get out of the city. We'll stop when we're in the clear." The convoy nodded in agreement, their engines growling as they shifted gears, speeding through the empty streets. They passed through industrial blocks and empty lots, moving away from the center of the city. Jack's heart raced, but his eyes were always scanning the road ahead. The danger wasn't over. They were being hunted. A sudden realization hit Jack like a bolt of lightning. The black car might be gone for now, but it could reappear at any moment. It was relentless, like a shadow that wouldn't leave them alone. Jack made a sharp turn, heading toward the highway. The open road was their best chance, but they had to get there first. As they crossed the outskirts of the city, the sounds of their bikes faded into the distance. Jack could feel the adrenaline beginning to wear off, but there was no time for rest. "Watch for signs of pursuit," Jack radioed. "If anyone sees that car again, let me know." The convoy moved through the night, with each rider focused on the task at hand. But the calm didn't last. Jack's heart dropped as he saw something in the distance. Headlights. A pair of them. The black car. It had found them again. Jack's hand gripped the handlebars, his knuckles white. "We've got company," Jack said firmly, his voice cutting through the radio. "It's them." His crew responded instantly, their pace quickening. They were ready for the confrontation. Jack's mind raced. The black car had caught up fast, but it was still far enough behind that they could make a run for it. They needed to make a decision, and fast. "We take the long road," Jack said, making a sharp right turn onto a winding road that cut through the hills. The convoy followed without hesitation, the bikes weaving through the turns with precision. The road was narrow and winding, but Jack knew it well. It was a shortcut, a place where they could lose their pursuers if they played it right. The black car was still trailing them, but it wasn't built for these tight turns. Jack pushed the bike harder, leaning into the curves as he led the convoy through the hills. The sound of the engines roared through the night as the convoy picked up speed, determined to outrun the car once and for all. But the car wasn't backing down. It swerved around the tight corners, its headlights never wavering, getting closer with every passing second. Jack's eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror, his heart pounding. They weren't going to outrun it, not unless they did something drastic. "We're losing them," Jack muttered, his voice tight. "But we need to make one more push." They were nearing a cliffside overlook, a sharp drop on one side. It was dangerous, but it was their best shot. Jack's mind was clear, calculating. He had an idea. "Follow me," he said into the radio, signaling the convoy to follow his lead. Jack took the sharp turn, heading straight for the cliffside. The convoy followed closely, the engines screaming as they pushed harder. The black car was still behind them, but it was too close now. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the overlook. They were almost there. Jack braked sharply, causing his bike to fishtail on the gravel. The car was still coming, too fast to slow down in time. Jack grinned as he saw the car's headlights grow larger in his rearview mirror. They were going to hit it hard. With a final push, Jack swung his bike wide, pulling the convoy into a quick, tight formation. The car was just seconds away from smashing into them. At the last possible moment, Jack pulled his bike to the left, forcing the car to make an impossible turn, skidding across the gravel. The black car's tires screeched as the driver fought to regain control, but it was too late. The car went off the edge of the cliff, tumbling down the rocky side with a crash. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he watched the car disappear from sight. The convoy stopped, engines idling, the sound of their bikes the only noise in the otherwise still night. Jack took a deep breath, his body tense. They had done it. For now, they were safe. But Jack knew this wasn't the end. Whoever was behind the wheel of that car would stop at nothing to find them. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened again, his resolve unshaken. They would keep running. They had to. For Maya, for Jamal, and for everyone who trusted him. The night felt endless as Jack and his crew rode through the winding roads, the cool air whipping past them. The convoy had barely stopped for a moment after losing the black car. Jack's mind was still racing. His heart, however, had finally slowed just enough for him to think clearly. Maya and Jamal were safe for now, but they all knew that the danger wasn't over. Whoever was behind the wheel of that car was relentless, and Jack wasn't sure how long they could keep running. The sound of the motorcycles filled the air as they pushed forward, but every mile felt like a countdown. Jack looked over his shoulder again, scanning the rearview mirror for any sign of the black car. Nothing. For the moment, they had lost it, but Jack wasn't fooled. The storm was still coming. "Keep your eyes peeled," Jack said into his radio. "We're not out of the woods yet." His voice was steady, but inside, he felt the weight of every decision he'd made. He had taken these kids under his protection, and if anything happened to them, he knew he wouldn't be able to live with himself. The convoy continued through the dark roads, moving farther away from the city, heading toward a place Jack knew well, a quiet, secluded cabin tucked away in the mountains. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. It was the only place Jack could think of where they could hide for a while. He needed to get them there before the black car, or whoever else was hunting them, could catch up. The wind howled through the trees as they ascended the mountain, the road growing steeper and more treacherous. The night was pitch black, with only the headlights of the motorcycles cutting through the darkness. Jack could hear the low hum of his engine, his focus completely on the road ahead. He didn't know how long they had before they were spotted again, but he wasn't about to risk it. "We're almost there," Jack said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the crew heard him clearly. "Once we're at the cabin, we stay put. No one goes out unless it's absolutely necessary." The crew nodded in acknowledgement, their bikes humming quietly in response. Jack's mind flashed back to the days when he had ridden alone, free of responsibility. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. Now, he had lives to protect, and that responsibility weighed heavily on him. They finally reached the cabin, a small structure that sat nestled in the trees, far away from the prying eyes of the city. The air was cold, but Jack didn't mind it. It felt like a temporary reprieve, a place where they could finally catch their breath. Jack parked his bike just outside the cabin and dismounted, turning to the crew. "Set up watch," he said. "Stay alert. I don't trust we've seen the last of them." The riders scattered, some heading inside the cabin, others taking up positions around the perimeter. Jack watched as Maya and Jamal stepped off the bike, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and relief. Jack's heart softened as he looked at them. He couldn't even begin to imagine what they had been through, but he was determined to keep them safe. "Come on," Jack said gently, gesturing for them to follow him inside. "Let's get you both settled." Inside, the cabin was small but cozy. There was a wood-burning stove that warmed the room, and a few old couches scattered around. The smell of pine and wood smoke filled the air, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Jack allowed himself to relax. "You two can sleep on the couch," Jack said, guiding them over to the corner. "I'll keep watch." Maya nodded, her face still pale but filled with gratitude. Jamal, on the other hand, still looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Jack could see the toll it had taken on him, on both of them. "You're safe here," Jack said quietly, giving them a reassuring smile. He meant it. No one would find them here, at least not easily. Outside, the night was still and silent. Jack stood near the window, looking out into the forest, his mind still sharp. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He had learned a long time ago to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him that something wasn't right. The sound of a twig snapping in the distance caught his attention. Jack's hand instinctively went to the sidearm holstered under his jacket. He didn't want to risk anything, not with the kids so close. But there was nothing. The woods were eerily quiet. "Nothing," Jack muttered to himself, turning back to the room. "But I'll stay up just in case." He pulled a chair near the fire and sat down, keeping his eyes on the door. The fire crackled in the background as the minutes stretched into hours. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the trees. Jack's thoughts kept returning to the black car. The driver. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a random act. Whoever was behind it had a purpose, and that purpose was getting closer with every mile. Inside the cabin, Maya and Jamal had finally settled onto the couch, but Jack could hear their soft breathing in the quiet. They were exhausted, but he knew it would take more than sleep to heal the scars they carried. As Jack kept watch, his mind raced. He wasn't going to let anyone take them again. Not on his watch. He had made a promise. He would keep it, no matter what it took. The morning light filtered weakly through the trees, casting long shadows across the cabin. Jack hadn't slept a wink. His eyes were heavy, but his mind was sharp, always on high alert. The fire in the stove had died down to embers, and the silence in the cabin was unnerving. He could hear the occasional rustle of the wind outside, but it was more than just the stillness that kept him awake. It was the feeling that they weren't alone. The previous night had been too quiet, too easy, and Jack knew better than to trust it. He stood up, stretching his legs, and moved cautiously to the window. Outside, the world seemed peaceful. The wind whispered through the branches, and the only movement came from the leaves swirling across the ground. Jack's instincts, however, were telling him that something was wrong. He couldn't put his finger on it, but there was a presence in the air, like a storm on the horizon. He checked his watch. It was nearly dawn. The kids were still asleep on the couch, their exhaustion apparent in the way they slept soundly, their bodies tangled in blankets. Jack's gaze softened as he looked at them. He had promised to protect them, but he couldn't help but wonder how much more they could endure. They had been through so much, and Jack knew that whatever was coming next, they weren't prepared for it. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise, a sharp, unmistakable sound of something shifting in the distance. It was a subtle movement, but it was enough to get his attention. His hand instinctively went to the gun holstered at his side as he moved silently to the door, his boots making no sound on the wooden floor. The air outside felt heavy as Jack stepped onto the porch. The morning fog still lingered in the air, swirling in ghostly tendrils, but there was no sign of movement. He strained his ears, listening for anything that might be out of place. Then, a crack, a twig snapping underfoot. Jack's heart raced. Someone was out there. He turned back toward the cabin, his hand still on the handle of his gun, his mind already making calculations. If they were going to come for him, they wouldn't waste time. He needed to act fast. He glanced inside at Maya and Jamal. They were still asleep, and Jack knew he couldn't wake them yet. They needed rest, but if they were going to survive, Jack needed to keep them safe, no matter the cost. He took a slow, calculated step off the porch and into the trees, the ground beneath his boots damp from the morning dew. The woods seemed to stretch out in every direction, the trees casting long, intimidating shadows. Jack moved silently, his eyes scanning the environment, every sense on high alert. He could feel the presence getting closer. Whoever was out there was closing in. Jack moved deeper into the trees, circling around the cabin, his eyes fixed on the clearing just beyond. He kept to the shadows, careful to make sure his steps were soft, but he wasn't alone. The moment he saw the figure in the distance, his heart stopped. It was another biker, but this one was different. The man's jacket was torn, the patches worn and faded. He was standing still, almost like he was waiting for something. Jack's instincts screamed at him to move, but he remained frozen, watching. The biker hadn't noticed him yet, but the tension was unbearable. Jack slowly, quietly, made his way closer, staying low to the ground, his every step calculated. As he moved closer, he could hear the man's voice, murmuring to someone Jack couldn't see. "They don't know yet," the biker said, his voice rough. "But they will. We'll be ready." Jack's heart sank. He had heard enough. The biker wasn't here alone, and the threats weren't over. He had to get back to the cabin, warn his crew, and get Maya and Jamal out before it was too late. Jack took a deep breath, quickly retreating into the trees. He couldn't risk being spotted. His mind was racing as he made his way back to the cabin, every step a decision between life and death. He reached the porch in what felt like an eternity, the weight of the situation growing with every passing second. As he entered the cabin, he moved silently, ensuring he didn't wake Maya and Jamal. But the look on his face when he turned to the crew told them everything. "They're here," Jack said, his voice low but full of urgency. "We need to move, now." The crew reacted immediately, standing up and grabbing their gear. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted instantly. The peaceful morning had turned into something much darker. Jack turned to Maya and Jamal, his face softening for just a moment. "It's time to go," he said gently. Maya stirred, waking with a start, her eyes wide with fear. Jamal, still half asleep, clung to her side. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're safe. We're going to keep you safe, I promise. They didn't have much time. The sound of the bikes started up in the distance, and Jack knew it was only a matter of minutes before their pursuers would arrive. The crew gathered their things quickly, making sure the kids were ready to go. Jack's mind was still racing as he mounted his bike, his hand gripping the throttle with determination. They couldn't stay here any longer. As the convoy rode out of the cabin's clearing, Jack's heart pounded. They were about to face the storm head-on, and he wasn't sure what would come next. But he knew one thing. He would keep fighting until the very end. The convoy sped down the winding road, the sound of roaring engines filling the air, but the tension was palpable. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner of the road. Maya and Jamal were riding close behind, but Jack could sense the unease in the air. They had barely managed to escape the last confrontation, but he knew this was far from over. The black car was still out there, and they weren't safe yet. Jack's thoughts raced as the convoy rounded another sharp bend in the road. The hills ahead were thick with trees, and the fog was beginning to creep in, making the night feel colder, more ominous. Stay sharp, Jack said into his radio, his voice low and tense. We don't know who's following us. Watch the rearview mirrors. The riders nodded, their voices a mix of resolve and concern. They were a family now, bound by loyalty and the shared weight of the responsibility to protect Maya and Jamal. Jack glanced back at the kids, seeing Maya clutching her brother's hand tightly, her face pale with fear. Jamal's head rested against his sister's shoulder, still half asleep, but there was a visible worry on his face. Jack's heart ached for them. They'd been through so much already, and now they were being hunted, with no clear end in sight. Jack had promised to keep them safe, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the threat was closing in on them. Suddenly, the sound of a motorcycle engine behind them made Jack's heart race. It wasn't just one bike, it was a group. He couldn't make out the exact number, but he could hear the growl of multiple engines approaching fast. Jack's hand went to his sidearm, his mind already calculating the next move. He didn't know who was behind them, but he had a sinking feeling it was more than just a random group of riders. The convoy increased speed, taking a sharp turn as they entered a narrow, tree-lined stretch of the road. Jack's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again, and his fears were confirmed. The black car was back. It was tailing them, but now there was a second threat. Another group of bikes had appeared, cutting off their escape route. Jack cursed under his breath. We've got company, and not just the car. There are bikes too. Get ready, he said, his voice calm but firm. The riders acknowledged, their faces grim, but determined. Jack's mind raced. They needed a plan. Fast. Take the next exit. We're splitting up. Go off-road if you have to. Jack barked, making a sharp turn. The convoy followed, swerving off the road and into the thick forest that bordered the highway. The bikes rumbled as they powered through the uneven terrain, tires kicking up dirt and gravel. Jack could hear the pursuit behind them. The car and the bikes were relentless. His mind was working at full speed, but he had to keep his focus. The forest was dense, the trees and underbrush thick with obstacles, but it offered one advantage. They could lose their pursuers in the maze of paths that crisscrossed through it. Jack led the convoy through a narrow path between the trees, his heart pounding. The bikes followed, their headlights casting long shadows on the forest floor. The black car was too large to navigate the rough terrain, but the bikes weren't as easy to shake. Jack could hear the growl of their engines getting closer. We need to find a place to make a stand, Jack said. He could feel the riders' tension as they sped through the forest, the trees whipping past them in the darkness. There was no turning back now. They had to deal with whatever was chasing them head-on. A clearing appeared ahead, a small patch of open ground where the trees were thinned out, offering a brief respite from the dense forest. Jack slammed the brakes on his bike, coming to a skidding halt. The rest of the convoy followed, each rider dismounting quickly, their eyes scanning the surroundings. Set up a defensive perimeter, Jack commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The riders immediately spread out, positioning themselves behind trees and rocks for cover. Maya and Jamal were huddled near Jack's bike, looking frightened but safe for the moment. Jack stayed near them, his senses heightened, ready for whatever came next. The sound of the approaching bikes grew louder, and Jack's heart pounded in his chest. The black car was still somewhere behind them, but it seemed to have slowed down, unable to follow them off the main road. For now, that was a relief, but Jack knew it wouldn't be long before they regrouped. Jack scanned the clearing, looking for any signs of movement. The first bike appeared in the distance, followed by another. Then a third. There were at least 5 of them. Riders coming fast, their headlights flashing like beacons in the night. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea who these riders were, but they weren't here for a friendly visit. The first rider came into view, a massive figure with a skull mask. He was riding a heavily modified chopper, the sound of the engine deafening as he roared toward them. Jack's instincts told him to move. "Take cover," Jack yelled, diving behind a large boulder with Maya and Jamal in tow. The riders pulled up, circling around the clearing. The leader, the one with the skull mask, dismounted first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his jacket bore patches Jack didn't recognize. "This is your last warning," the leader said, his voice low and threatening. "You've been running long enough. It's time to pay for what you did." Jack's eyes narrowed. He didn't recognize the man, but he knew enough to see this wasn't about just chasing them down. It was personal. "We're not interested in your games," Jack said, his voice steady, his hand still on his weapon. The leader grinned, a dangerous, knowing look in his eyes. "Then you'll be the first to go." The tension in the air was thick, the standoff between Jack and the riders seemingly endless. Jack knew that he couldn't afford to back down. Not now. Not with Maya and Jamal counting on him. A fight was coming, and he was ready to face it head-on. The tension in the clearing was thick, palpable, as Jack stood with his back pressed against the boulder, eyes locked on the leader of the approaching group. The riders circled like predators, and Jack could feel the weight of their glares as they sized him up. Maya and Jamal were crouched behind the boulder with him, their small bodies trembling in fear. Jack's grip on his weapon tightened, but his focus never wavered. He had to protect them, no matter the cost. The leader, still wearing that skull mask, dismounted from his chopper slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. His crew followed, each one a hulking figure, their faces covered in varying degrees of intimidation. "You think you can just run from us?" the leader asked, his voice low and menacing. "You think you're safe out here in the woods? You're not. This is our territory now." Jack's jaw clenched. He had no idea who this group was, but their threats were clear. They weren't here to talk. "This is your last chance," the leader continued, his eyes flicking over to Maya and Jamal. "You can hand over the kids, and we'll let you walk away. But if you keep running, it'll be worse for everyone." The words stung, and Jack's mind raced. Handing over the kids was never an option. Not now, not ever. "We're not giving them up," Jack said, his voice steady but full of resolve. "You'll have to go through me first." The leader's grin widened beneath the mask, but there was no humor in it, only a cold, calculating malice. "So be it," he said, signaling to his men. "Get them." The riders surged forward, their bikes revving as they closed in. Jack's hand hovered over his weapon, ready for anything, but he wasn't about to fire the first shot. He needed to think. He needed a plan. The crew sprang into action, rushing to take cover behind the trees and the rocks. Jack motioned for the others to do the same. The bikers came at them fast, but the terrain worked in their favor. The forest offered plenty of places to hide, to strike from the shadows. Jack moved quickly, his mind calculating the angles. He watched as 2 riders tried to flank them from the right, their heavy boots crunching on the forest floor. Jack didn't hesitate. He ducked behind a large tree, then spun out from behind it, aiming his weapon at the 2 bikers. They froze, their eyes widening in surprise, but Jack didn't give them a chance to react. One fell to the ground with a grunt, and the other hesitated for a second too long before Jack's shot found its mark. The others were moving in, but Jack's crew had already taken cover, their eyes scanning every movement in the clearing. The sound of gunfire filled the air, the chaos quickly escalating. Maya and Jamal were crouched low behind the boulder, their wide eyes filled with fear, but Jack could see the trust they had in him. They believed in him, and that was all that mattered. "Stay down," Jack shouted, his voice harsh but calm, as the gunfire continued to echo around them. "I won't let them hurt you." The leader of the bikers didn't move. He stood tall, watching the firefight unfold with a calculating stare, but Jack knew better than to underestimate him. He wasn't just some random thug. This man was a leader, and he wouldn't back down easily. "You think you can win this?" the leader shouted over the noise, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen it all. "We have the numbers. You're just a bunch of strays trying to play hero." Jack's eyes narrowed, his pulse quickening, but he wasn't intimidated. This wasn't about numbers. It was about survival. Jack had been through worse. He had seen the worst that the world had to offer and had always come out on top. "You're wrong," Jack called back. "We don't run from people like you. And we never will." The leader stepped forward, his heavy boots thudding against the ground as he advanced on Jack's position. "You're going to regret that," he sneered, drawing a weapon of his own, a long knife that gleamed in the dim light. Jack didn't wait for him to get any closer. With a swift motion, he dropped to the ground and rolled out of the way. The leader lunged at him, but Jack was already up and moving, darting around a nearby tree. He knew he had to keep moving, keep fighting. There was no time to think. As Jack moved, he could hear the sounds of the other bikers closing in. His crew was holding their ground, but they were outnumbered, and he knew they couldn't keep this up for long. He needed to get to the kids. He needed to get them out of here. With one swift motion, Jack sprinted toward the boulder where Maya and Jamal were hiding. He could hear the leader's footsteps pounding behind him, but Jack didn't look back. "We need to go now," Jack said, his voice urgent as he reached them. Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide, but she didn't say a word. She knew what was coming. The gunfire was still ringing out, and the other bikers were moving in, but Jack wasn't about to let them trap him. He reached out, pulling Maya and Jamal close, shielding them as best as he could. He turned to the rest of the crew, who were still fighting back the bikers. "Cover us," Jack shouted. "We're getting out of here." The crew responded instantly, creating a barrier as Jack led Maya and Jamal through the trees. The fight wasn't over, but Jack had a new goal: get the kids to safety. He couldn't lose them. Not now. The battle was far from over, but Jack was determined to finish it, no matter the cost. The forest was thick, the air heavy with tension as Jack pushed forward, guiding Maya and Jamal through the dense underbrush. The sounds of the ongoing battle were muffled by the trees, but Jack could hear the occasional distant shout, the rumble of engines, the unmistakable sounds of chaos. He was determined to get them out of there. His thoughts raced as he scanned the forest, calculating every move. The bikers were close, but they were slowing down, their pursuit hindered by the terrain. Jack had managed to create some distance, but it wasn't enough. They needed to get to the highway, fast. "Keep up," Jack muttered under his breath, turning to look at Maya and Jamal. Maya was holding her brother's hand tightly, her face pale but determined. Jamal, still a little dazed, was struggling to keep up, but he trusted Jack, and that was all that mattered. "We're almost there," Jack said, his voice steady. "Just a little farther." Maya nodded, her eyes focused ahead, but Jack could see the fear still lingering in them. They had been through so much already, and they weren't out of danger yet. The sounds of the bikes and gunfire echoed through the trees behind them. Jack knew they couldn't outrun the riders forever. They needed a plan. Jack pushed through the brush, urging the group forward, his thoughts already on the next steps. They needed to get to the highway, where they could either escape or make a stand. But they were running out of time. The riders were closing in. "Move," Jack shouted, urgency in his voice as he motioned for Maya and Jamal to follow him. The convoy was still behind, but they were growing weaker. Jack could feel it. The riders were getting more desperate, and that made them even more dangerous. The forest was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap. As they neared the clearing, Jack caught sight of the faint glow of headlights through the trees. The highway was just beyond the tree line, but the clearing was open, a perfect target for their pursuers. Jack's heart pounded as he made a decision. "We're not stopping," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "We're getting to the highway." Jack motioned for the crew to stay low, and they pushed forward, making their way through the final stretch of the forest. As they neared the edge of the woods, the sound of the motorcycles grew louder. Jack could feel the heat of the engine exhaust on his skin as they got closer. He knew they didn't have much time. He pushed forward, the clearing now just a few yards away. "Almost there," Jack muttered under his breath. His fingers tightened on the handlebars as he sped up, guiding Maya and Jamal as quickly as he could. The clearing was open, the road just beyond it. Jack could hear the whine of motorcycle engines in the distance, but they were almost out of range. Just a little farther, and they would be on the highway, out of danger. As Jack broke through the trees, the wide open space of the clearing lay before him. He could see the highway, the cars speeding by, just 100 yards away. They were almost free. But then the sound of revving engines reached Jack's ears, and his heart sank. They weren't alone. The riders had caught up. A group of 5 bikes emerged from the trees, blocking the way to the highway. Jack's mind raced, but there was no way around them. They had been cornered. The leader, the one in the skull mask, rode to the front, his eyes fixed on Jack. "You really thought you could run, didn't you?" the leader called, his voice dripping with contempt. Jack's hand went to the sidearm at his waist, but he knew this wasn't a fight they could win. "We're not running anymore," Jack said, his voice steady, his body bracing for what was to come. The leader smiled beneath the mask, his grip tightening on the handlebars. "You're not in control here. This ends now." Jack looked around, his mind calculating. They were trapped, but he couldn't give up. Not now. Not when Maya and Jamal were depending on him. "Stay back," Jack said to the crew, his voice harsh. He wasn't about to let these men take them without a fight. "Get ready," he added, turning to the others. They had to hold their ground. The leader made a signal, and the other bikers advanced, moving in tight, closing the gap. Jack's pulse quickened, but he didn't flinch. The sound of the engines filled the air, but Jack's focus was unwavering. He had no choice but to face this head-on. "We've been through worse," Jack muttered, his voice low but full of resolve. "We're not backing down now." He motioned for the crew to take their positions, his eyes locked on the leader. Jack knew that this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about keeping Maya and Jamal safe. He would do whatever it took to protect them. The standoff between the 2 groups was tense, every rider waiting for a signal. The wind whipped around them, the quiet before the storm. Jack's eyes never left the leader as the standoff continued. They were outnumbered, but Jack wasn't going to let that stop him. With one final glance at Maya and Jamal, Jack knew that no matter what happened next, he would fight to the end. He wasn't going to lose them. Not now, not ever. The standoff in the clearing had reached its peak, the tension so thick it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Jack stood tall, facing the group of bikers, every muscle in his body tense and ready for whatever would come next. The leader in the skull mask was still there, his posture relaxed but with a dangerous aura that screamed confidence. Jack could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on him, but he never wavered. He wasn't going to back down. Not now, not after everything they'd been through. "You're outnumbered," the leader called out, his voice a mix of mockery and threat. "There's no way you can win this. You're trapped." Jack's grip on his weapon tightened, but he knew this wasn't about brute force anymore. This was about outthinking them, about using the one advantage he still had, time. The bikers had surrounded them, but Jack could see the hesitation in their movements. They were not as certain as the leader was trying to make them seem. Jack didn't have much time. Maya and Jamal were huddled behind him, their faces pale and filled with fear. The last thing Jack wanted was for them to witness the violence he knew was about to unfold, but there was no other choice. They had to protect themselves. "This ends now," Jack muttered to himself, though loud enough for his crew to hear. He wasn't going to let this drag out any longer. He needed a way out. He just had to find it before it was too late. The leader grinned under his skull mask, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You're a stubborn one," he said, shaking his head slowly. "That's fine. It's your funeral." The leader made a subtle hand gesture, and immediately, the bikers started moving. They didn't charge all at once, but they circled Jack and his crew, closing in like wolves surrounding their prey. Jack was ready. He could feel the adrenaline surge through his veins as he backed up slowly, guiding Maya and Jamal behind him. "Stay low," Jack ordered, his voice low but firm. He could feel the growing pressure of the situation, but he wasn't going to let panic take hold. He had been through worse, and he could handle this. The leader of the bikers was still smirking, clearly enjoying the power of the situation. Jack could sense the trap closing in around them. The forest was their only cover, and he knew it was their only chance to escape. Without warning, Jack spun around, moving swiftly into the trees, leading the convoy deeper into the woods. His crew followed without question, the sound of their boots hitting the ground muffled by the underbrush. The bikers hesitated for a moment, caught off guard by the sudden movement, but they quickly recovered, revving their engines and chasing after them. The clearing was left behind, the road to freedom still a few 100 yards away. Jack didn't stop to look back, his focus entirely on the path ahead. They had to get to the highway before the bikers could catch up. The trees ahead started to thin out, and Jack could see the faint glow of the road up ahead. The convoy's pace quickened as they pushed forward, the sound of motorcycles fading in the distance. But Jack's heart was still pounding. He knew they weren't out of danger yet. The leader of the bikers was persistent, and the group was determined. "Keep going," Jack shouted to his crew, his voice carrying through the trees. "We're almost there." They were close now, the road just a few yards away. But as they neared the edge of the woods, Jack's heart sank. The leader's voice rang out behind them, louder than before. "You think you can escape us?" he shouted, his words cutting through the air like a threat. The bikers had caught up, and the road was now blocked. Jack's mind raced, but there was no time for hesitation. He had to make a decision. They had no choice but to stand and fight. Jack turned to his crew, his eyes sharp and focused. "Get ready," he said, his voice cold and determined. "This is it. We stand our ground here." The bikes roared to a stop as the leader and his crew surrounded them, their engines revving menacingly. The air was thick with tension. The standoff had reached its breaking point, and there was no more room for retreat. The leader, still grinning, stepped forward, his hand resting on his weapon. "You're out of options," he said, his tone filled with mockery. "This ends now. Your little fight ends here." Jack felt the weight of his crew behind him, and for a moment, everything felt still. The only thing that mattered was the promise he'd made to protect Maya and Jamal. They were depending on him, and he wouldn't let them down. The leader's smile faltered as he took a step closer, his eyes locked onto Jack's. "You're wasting your time," he growled. "It's over." But Jack wasn't about to let that happen. He took a step forward, his posture unwavering, eyes never leaving the leader. "You're wrong," Jack said firmly. "It's not over. Not yet." And with that, the first shot was fired. The sound of the shot echoed through the woods, cutting through the tension like a blade. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as the leader of the bikers staggered back, his hand instinctively reaching for his side. The standoff had turned into chaos in an instant, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder. Jack's eyes never left the leader, his mind racing as he calculated his next move. The leader growled in pain, his body tense as he tried to steady himself. "You think you can take us down that easily?" The leader spat, his voice filled with rage. "You're making a mistake." Jack stood firm, his weapon still trained on the man, his crew ready to move at a moment's notice. "This isn't a mistake," Jack said coldly. "This ends now." The other bikers, sensing the shift in the fight, hesitated for just a moment, their eyes flicking between their leader and Jack's crew. That hesitation was all Jack needed. He stepped forward, moving swiftly, using the confusion to his advantage. The crew followed, closing in on the remaining bikers, taking advantage of the chaos to get the upper hand. The leader's men scattered, trying to regroup, but they weren't prepared for the Iron Riders. Jack's crew was relentless, moving like a well-oiled machine, outnumbering the bikers and forcing them into a retreat. The gunfire stopped, replaced by the sounds of fists colliding, the thud of boots against gravel, and the muffled grunts of men who had underestimated their opponents. Jack's eyes remained locked on the leader, who was now on his knees, struggling to breathe. "You're done," Jack said, stepping forward, his voice quiet but full of authority. The leader looked up at him, his eyes filled with hatred, but Jack didn't flinch. "Get up," Jack ordered. The leader hesitated, his hand still clutching his side, blood seeping through his fingers. "You're not going to get away with this," the leader snarled, his voice weak. "You're not leaving this place alive." Jack shook his head, his expression hard. "You don't get to make that call." With a swift motion, Jack disarmed the leader, taking the knife from his hand and tossing it aside. "You're going to live, but you're done here. If you come after us again, I won't hesitate." The leader's face twisted in anger, but Jack didn't give him the chance to respond. He turned to his crew. "We're not staying here. Get the bikes, get moving. We leave now." Jack didn't wait for any more protests. His mind was already focused on getting Maya and Jamal out of there. They couldn't risk being seen again. The kids had been through enough, and he wasn't going to let them see any more violence. Maya and Jamal were still huddled behind the boulder, their faces pale, but there was a sense of relief in their eyes. They had made it out alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. Jack approached them slowly, his voice calm. "It's over. You're safe." Maya looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "Are we really safe now?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. Jack knelt down beside her, offering a reassuring smile. "For now, yes," he said. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we'll get you somewhere safe. I promise." Jamal clung to his sister's side, his eyes wide, still not fully understanding the danger they had just escaped. Jack's heart softened as he looked at them. They were just kids, caught in something far bigger than they should have ever been. He wasn't going to let them face any more of it. He stood up, motioning for the crew to move. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady. The convoy started up their bikes, engines roaring to life. And Jack's focus was unwavering as they sped down the road. The forest was behind them, the dangerous bikers left in the dust. Jack knew that the black car was still out there, but they had put some distance between themselves and the fight. He glanced back at Maya and Jamal, who were riding close behind him, their faces filled with quiet relief. They were safe, for now. But Jack knew the danger wasn't over. The people they were running from didn't give up easily. "Stay close," Jack said into the radio, his voice firm. "We're not stopping until we're far enough away. Keep your eyes peeled." His crew acknowledged, their voices steady despite the chaos they had just survived. As they rode, Jack's mind began to work. He knew they couldn't keep running forever, but for now, he would take them as far as he could. He owed them that. The sun was rising now, the first light breaking through the trees, casting long shadows across the road. Jack looked ahead, his focus never wavering. The road was long, and the journey ahead was uncertain. But for the first time in a long while, Jack allowed himself a small moment of hope. They were still alive. They were still together. And that was enough for now.